And I just noticed one thing, and I would say that means it's all over. What do you want from Ukraine? He asks me, screaming. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories. This is Ambassador Sondland speaking to me. Just happened. To which I turned off the television. So he's going, what do you want? What do you want? I hear all these theories. What do you want, right? And now, here's my response that he gave, just gave. Ready? You have the cameras rolling? I want nothing. That's what I want from Ukraine. That's what I said. I want nothing. I said it twice. So he goes, he asked me the question, what do you want? I keep hearing all these things. What do you want? He finally gets me. I don't know him very well. I have not spoken to him much. This is not a man I know well. Seems like a nice guy, though. But I don't know him well. He was with other candidates. He actually supported other candidates. Not me. Came in late. But here's my response. Now, if you weren't fake news, you'd cover it properly. I say to the ambassador in response, I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky, President Zelensky, to do the right thing. So here's my answer. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Then he says, this is the final word from the President of the United States. I want nothing.
Yesterday, Ambassador Volker, who I consider to be very talented and a man of integrity, and I believe you think he's a man of integrity, correct?
I do.
He testified that the President of the United States did not tie either a meeting with the President, a phone call, or any aid to investigations of Burisma 2016 or the Bidens, that the President did not do that. And you've testified that the President did not tell you that he tied them either, correct?
I did testify to that, although when Ambassador Volker and I were working on the statement and negotiating with the Ukrainians, it was clear to Ambassador Volker that a meeting would not happen without the Burisma in 2016. That was very clear to Ambassador Volker.
And how do you know that? What did he say to you? Because he says that was not clear to him. In fact, he says that's not the case. He was working on that. He knows that that's what the President wanted, but he didn't have it as this was a requirement.
Oh, I strongly disagree with that portion of his testimony. It was absolutely a requirement, or we would have just had the meeting and been done with it.
What about the aid? He says that they weren't tied, that the aid was not tied.
And I didn't say they were conclusively tied either. I said I was presuming it.
Okay, and so the President never told you they were tied. So your testimony, his testimony is consistent, and the President did not tie aid to investigations.
That's correct.
Okay, he also testified that he spoke to Giuliani and that Giuliani did not relate that he was tying on behalf of the President or on the President's behalf aid. And then, in fact, Giuliani never said to him that aid was tied to investigations. Now, the question I have for you is, did you ever have a conversation with Giuliani that did not involve Volker? Because your testimony is a lot of we's and us's. So do you and Giuliani have a separate conference, separate phone call where Giuliani told you that the aid was tied? Because Volker says, and if he was on all your phone calls, Volker says that never happened.
No, I did have a few conversations. I don't recall how many because I don't have the records with Mr. Giuliani directly when Mr. Volker wasn't available.
And did Giuliani say to you, go ahead, what were you going to say?
I don't believe I testified that Mr. Giuliani told me that aid was tied.
Oh, I think, see, this is part of the problem, Ambassador Sondland, and I just want to walk you through this, is you've said to us everyone was in the loop, and everyone knew. Now, hold on a second. I've listened to you today, as a lot of people. Not only are your answers somewhat circular, frequently you've contradicted yourself in your own answer. Now, the text messages and emails that you put up there, Kurt Volker walked us through, and he has a completely different understanding of what you were saying than what you're saying you were saying. So I'm a little confused as to how everyone's in the loop, because if Giuliani didn't give you any express statement, then it can't be that you believe this from Giuliani. Now, let me tell you right now, because is Donald Trump your friend?
No, we're not friends.
Okay. Do you like the president?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, after you testified, Chairman Schiff ran out and gave a press conference and said he gets to impeach the President of the United States because of your testimony. And if you pull up CNN today, right now, their banner says, Sondland ties Trump to withholding aid. Is that your testimony today, Ambassador Sondland, that you have evidence that Donald Trump tied the investigations to the aid? Because I don't think you're saying that.
I've said repeatedly, Congressman, I was presuming. I also said that President Trump.
So no one told you, not just the president. Giuliani didn't tell you, Mulvaney didn't tell you, nobody, Pompeo didn't tell you, nobody else on this planet told you that Donald Trump was tying aid to these investigations. Is that correct?
I think I already testified.
No, answer the question. Is it correct? No one on this planet told you that Donald Trump was tying this aid to the investigations? Because if your answer is yes, then the chairman's wrong and the headline on CNN is wrong. No one on this planet told you that President Trump was tying aid to investigations. Yes or no?
Yes.
So you really have no testimony today that ties President Trump to a scheme to withhold aid from Ukraine in exchange for these investigations.
Other than my own presumption.
Which is nothing. I mean, that's what I don't understand. So you know what hearsay evidence is, Ambassador? Hearsay is when I testify what someone else told me. Do you know what made-up testimony is? Made-up testimony is when I just presume it. I mean, you're just assuming all of these things, and then you're giving them the evidence that they're running out and doing press conferences, and CNN's headline is saying that you're saying the President of the United States should be impeached because he tied aid to investigations, and you don't know that, correct?
I never said the President of the United States should be impeached.
Nope, but you did. You have left people with the confusing impression that you were giving testimony that you did not. You do not have any evidence that the President of the United States was tied to withholding aid from Ukraine in exchange for investigation.
Did the president ever tell you personally about any preconditions for anything?
No.
Okay, so the president never told you about any preconditions for the aid to be released?
No.
The president never told you about any preconditions for a White House meeting?
Personally, no.
You said you didn't have your records or your documents from the State Department, but if you did, there wouldn't be any document or record that ties President Trump personally to any of this, correct?
Boy, I don't want to speculate what would be on...
Your documents or records.
I don't recall anything like that.
Okay, no. Good heavens, okay. You testified Mr. Giuliani's requests for a quid pro quo for the White House meeting. And you indicated that you believe that he was evincing President Trump's interests, correct?
My contact with Mr. Giuliani began, as I said, very late in the process, after August 1st, when I was first introduced to him by a text from Ambassador Volker. Right. So we had already begun those discussions, I believe, with the Ukrainians prior to August 1st, so everything was being funneled through others, including Mr. Volker.
Okay. You testified that Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the president, correct?
That's our understanding, yes.
But how did you know that? Who told you?
Well, when the president says, talk to my personal attorney, and then Mr. Giuliani, as his personal attorney, makes certain requests or demands, we assume it's coming from the president. I'm not testifying that I heard the president tell Mr. Giuliani to tell us, so if that's your question.
Right, but at your deposition, you said the question was at the May 23rd meeting when the president said, go talk to Rudy. You responded, he didn't even say go talk. He said, talk to Rudy. You subsequently said it was sort of like, I don't want to talk about this. So it wasn't an order or a direction to go talk with Mr. Giuliani, correct?
Our conclusion, and the conclusion of the three of us, was that if we did not talk to Rudy, nothing would move forward on Ukraine.
Okay.
When did President Zelensky announce that the investigation was going to happen? On page 14, you said this: was there a quid pro quo? Today's your opening statement. As I testified previously, with regard to a requested White House call, White House meeting, the answer is yes, that there needed to be a public statement from President Zelensky. When the chairman asked you about the security assistance dollars, you said there needed to be a public announcement from Zelensky. So I'm asking you a simple question. When did that happen?
Never did.
Never did. They got the call July 25th. They got the meeting, not in the White House, but in New York on September 25th. They got the money on September 11th. When did the meeting happen again?
Never did.
You don't know who was in the meeting?
Which meeting are you referring to?
The meeting that never happened. Who was in it? You know how you know how Zelensky announced it? Did he tweet it? Did he do a press statement? Did he do a press conference? You know how that happened? I mean, you got all three of them wrong. They get the call, they get the meeting, they get the money. It's not 2 + 2, it's 0 for 3. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. And you told Mr. Castor that the president never told you that the announcement had to happen to get anything. In fact, he didn't just not tell you that, he explicitly said the opposite. The gentleman from Texas just read it. You said to the President of the United States, what do you want from Ukraine? The President, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. I want him to do what he ran on. What did he run on, Ambassador Sondland?
Transparency.
And dealing with corruption, right?
That's right.
Mr. Castor raised another important point. Why didn't you put that statement in your opening statement? I think you said you couldn't fit it in. Is that right? Said we might be here for 46 minutes instead of 45 minutes.
It wasn't purposeful, trust me.
Wasn't purposeful?
No.
Couldn't fit it in a 23-page opener. The most important statement about the subject matter at hand, the President of the United States in a direct conversation with you about the issue at hand, and the President says, let me read it one more time. What do you want from Ukraine, Mr. President? I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want this new guy, brand new guy in politics. His party just took over. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. I want him to run on and do what he ran on, which is deal with corruption. And you can't find time to fit that in a 23-page opening statement. You know what a quid pro quo is?
I do.
This for that, right? Looks to me like Ukraine got that 3 times, and there was no this. We didn't do anything. Or excuse me, they didn't have to do anything. I've never seen anything like that. And this is when the call came out. Y'all remember this? When the call came out, everyone said we're gonna quid pro quo. There's gonna be that was what was in the call, and of course that didn't happen. That didn't happen. Remember what the complaint said? Remember what the memo said of the whistleblower? This call was frightening. This call was scary. All those things. None of that materialized. None of that materialized. Time to bring it up, that would have been the time. But guess what? At no time, Senator Johnson tells us, at no time during this meeting or on any other meeting on this trip was there any mention by Zelensky or any other Ukrainian that they were feeling pressure to do anything in return for military aid. Not even, Senator Johnson says, not even after Murphy warned them about getting involved in the election. So Murphy gave this big deal on Giuliani and nothing. And guess what Murphy also said? I do not dispute any of Senator Johnson's factual representations regarding the meeting. If ever it was going to happen, September 5th was the day. No one from the White House there, not Ambassador Bolton, not Vice President, no one there. But even then it didn't happen. And we got all kinds of other meetings when it didn't happen. And of course, as you testified earlier, there was never an announcement. You said there were 3 quid pro quos, but there weren't, because there was never an announcement. I mean, this is as clear as it gets, but these guys want to keep stirring it up based on no direct evidence whatsoever. And the best direct evidence we have is actually what the president told you. I want nothing. There is no quid pro quo. I want Zelensky to do exactly what he campaigned on. And when that became clear to us, guess what? They got the money. They got the money. God bless America. It all worked out, right? This is crazy what we're going through because the facts are so darn clear.
Responds to Ambassador Sondland's comments before the House Intelligence Committee attributable to the DOE Secretary of the Press Secretary. Ambassador Sondland's testimony today misrepresented both Secretary Perry's interaction and with Rudy Giuliani and direction the Secretary received from President Trump. As previously stated, Secretary Perry spoke to Rudy Giuliani only once at the President's request. No one else was on that call. At no point before, during, or after the phone call did the words Biden or Burisma ever come up in the presence of Secretary Perry. Again, I ask that that be entered into the record.
Without objection, although I would note that they've also refused to come and testify under oath.
The American people expect a lot of things out of politics. Arguments, protests, we certainly see that. Clash of principles and ideas. I think sometimes eventually they actually would like to see some compromise. But I think something they expect above everything else, fundamental, they expect that there is a sense of fairness about it. And I want to read part of a text I received from someone that I have tremendous respect for. Just a few hours ago, she wrote, "Crafting a story to hurt another human being can never be right. The means of destroying and hurting another individual just does not justify the end, and politics does not give anyone free pass to destroy other people." Now, you can say a lot about the treatment of President Trump over the last 3 years, but I think one thing you cannot argue is that it has been fair. There were those calling for his impeachment literally before he was inaugurated. For 2.5 years, we were told every single day he has betrayed our country. He is a Russian asset. He has committed treason. Accusations that we know now are not true, and for which we never have any evidence to support that. He was accused of obstruction, and now here we are actually impeaching the president over, well, first, quid pro quo, until we found out that didn't poll very well with focus groups, and then it was bribery, until virtually every witness before us who was asked a question said they had no evidence of bribery, and now it's extortion. And again, the American people expect some sense of fairness. So when Nancy Pelosi goes before she has seen a shred of evidence, and she announces the president has betrayed his oath of office, he has betrayed the American people, he betrayed national security, without seeing any evidence, again, the American people say, well, what is fair about that? So the question before us now is, again, extortion. That's the latest version of the charges against the president. I'm not an attorney. Extortion sounds pretty scary. It's kind of serious. I had to look it up, what it means. It means obtaining money or property by threat to a victim's property or loved ones. Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to read you a couple quotes from President Zelensky and then ask you a question. First, from a Ukrainian press release, Donald Trump is convinced that the new Ukrainian government will be able to quickly improve the image of Ukraine. Complete investigation of corruption, which inhibited the interaction with Ukraine and the USA. Does that sound like President Zelensky is being bribed or extorted in that comment?
As I testified previously, I'm not a lawyer either, and I don't want to characterize any legal terms. I really don't.
That's fine. I think most people would read that and say, that doesn't sound like he's under severe pressure. He makes it very clear in his own words then. Ukrainian President Zelensky told reporters during a joint press conference with Donald Trump that he was not pressured by the U.S. president. Again, I was not pressured. He used another time. There was no blackmail. I would ask you, do you think he felt like he was being extorted by the president based on these comments?
I really think that's for the committee and the Congress to...
Well, you know what, Mr. Ambassador, it's really for the American people.
I agree.
And the American people aren't stupid. And the American people can hear that, and they can say, I don't think he was under duress. I don't think he was being extorted. I don't think there was an exchange of a bribe. And I would conclude with this last observation. It is common for our national policy to withhold aid for various reasons. You know that's true as an ambassador. Is that not true?
That's true.
It's frequent, isn't it, that we will withhold aid for various reasons.
That's correct.
It is a policy. I mean, for example, President Bush did it. He suspended military aid to 35 countries over their lack of support for the International Criminal Court. I'll bet that helped his political standing back home. But I don't remember anyone suggesting we should impeach him for it. President Trump did it last year with Afghanistan over corruption. We did it with Pakistan over much the same thing. And no one suggested that we impeach them for it. This is a common occurrence in international relations. It is hardly an impeachable offense.
The claim, Ambassador, that you had accused of having an irregular channel, drug deals, now supposedly you're one amigo. Nobody on this side of the aisle claimed that you were one amigo.
I lost my amigos?
Yeah, not from us, not from us. No bribes given to that you made any bribes to the Ukrainian people or to the Ukrainian president. Your co-conspirator, Kurt Volker. I find it remarkable and troubling how the Democrats and their collaborators in the press have been able to vilify Ambassador Volker, who was supposed to work on these matters in Ukraine, like you, Ambassador. It was a very regular channel, and no amount of storytelling by the left and the Democrats on this dais will change that. It was the regular channel. Testimony received today was far from compelling, conclusive, and provides zero evidence of any of the crimes that have been alleged. In fact, Ambassador Sondland testified that he presumed the temporary pause in military aid was conditioned on Ukraine carrying out the investigations the Democrats are desperate to portray as nefarious. The Democrats have, as their custom, seized on this presumption as proof they can use it against the president. However, Ambassador Sondland testified in his deposition that when he asked President Trump, "What do you want from Ukraine?" President Trump replied, "I want nothing. There is no quid pro quo." Let me repeat. President Trump said, "I want nothing. There is no quid pro quo." This comes on the heels of the testimony by Ambassador Volker that he saw no evidence of bribery, extortion, quid pro quo, or treasonous actions. We didn't get to ask him about obstruction of justice because we didn't know that was on the table until today. Like the president's call with President Zelensky, Democrats want the American people to believe, as one Democrat on this committee put it, that hearsay is much better than direct evidence. And I think Mr. Ratcliffe from Texas laid out the direct evidence that we have from your testimony today. Nothing we have heard establishes a claim that the president acted improperly in his dealings with Ukraine, and certainly nothing has been presented to support anything near impeachment. In the meantime, Mr. Chair, we continue to have no answers to the questions that only you know, starting with who is the whistleblower who gave birth to this hoax and what was the nature of his coordination with the Democrats on this committee? Second, what is the full extent of Ukraine's election meddling against the Trump campaign in 2016? And finally, why did Burisma hire Hunter Biden? What did he do for them? And did his position impact any U.S. government actions under the Obama administration?
Mr. Sondland, you testified that you never received any direct confirmation or specific information as to why there was a hold on aid.
That's correct.
And in fact, you testified, quote, "President Trump never told me directly that the aid was conditioned on the investigations," end quote.
That's correct.
You said, quote, "Never heard those words from the president," correct?
Correct.
Instead, you testified that in your September 9th call with President Trump, the president said, quote, "No quid pro quo. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want President Zelensky to do the right thing, do what he ran on," end quote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the fact is, the aid was given to Ukraine without any announcement of new investigations.
That's correct.
And President Trump did, in fact, meet with President Zelensky in September at the United Nations, correct?
He did.
And there was no announcement of investigations before this meeting?
Correct.
And there was no announcement of investigations after this meeting?
That's right.
And you've been very clear when Chairman Schiff has asked you broadly about investigations. You've corrected that to say specifically your understanding of investigations are investigation into the 2016 elections and investigations into Burisma. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And are you aware that during the Obama administration, the U.S. partnered with the UK and Ukraine on an investigation into the owner of Burisma as part of Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts?
I became aware of it today during the hearing.
Other witnesses have testified, but yes. And in fact, the Obama administration's State Department was concerned about the potential appearance of conflict of interest with Hunter Biden serving on the board of Burisma because they raised this as they were preparing Ambassador Yovanovitch for her Senate confirmation. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of it.
She testified, when I asked her that question, both in the open hearing and the closed deposition. And I've asked most of our witnesses this, and every witness I've asked has said yes, and I want to ask you this today. Do you believe that Hunter Biden having a position on the board of Burisma has the potential appearance of a conflict of interest?
I don't want to characterize Hunter Biden's service on the board one way or another. I just don't know enough.
So you disagree with every other witness that has answered yes, there is a potential appearance of a conflict of interest?
Well, you asked if there was a conflict or an appearance of
potential, my quote was, the potential appearance of a conflict of interest.
I didn't hear the word appearance. Well, clearly it's an appearance of a conflict.
Correct. Clearly it is an appearance of conflict of interest. Again, this is something that every witness has answered yes to or agreed with it could have a potential appearance, and yet we are not allowed to call Hunter Biden to answer questions in front of this committee.
My colleagues on the other side would argue is that we're trying to protect the whistleblower. An equally valid and credible interpretation is that there's something to hide, and that this unlevel playing field that's been created by the chairman's insistence that there is a statutory right to anonymity maintains that unlevel playing field and the advantages that gives them. Now, the chairman also announces at every hearing that he will not tolerate, and I agree with him, any witness intimidation, any threats, or any issues of trying to bully a witness. Ambassador Sondland, have you, your family, or your businesses received any threats or reprisals or attempts to harm you in any way?
Many.
Could you give us an example or two?
We have countless emails, apparently, to my wife. Our properties are being picketed and boycotted.
Let's explore that one. Our own colleague, Congressman Earl Blumenauer from Oregon, has in fact called for a boycott of your hotel chains or your hotels in Oregon. I'm assuming he believes that that will harm you to the point that you will then be bullied into doing whatever he wants done. Now, my colleagues and I know that using the word bully and Earl Blumenauer in the same sentence is a bit over the top. But nevertheless, he intended to harm you and your businesses. Is that what you would surmise?
That's my understanding.
And that the boycotts, his call for boycott gave rise to demonstrations in front of your hotels that made your customers have to weave in and out of the demonstrators to try to actually get into the hotels?
As I understand, they're going on as we speak.
Well, the words are better put by a couple of other Oregonians. It says, Congressman Blumenauer's irresponsible attempt to hurt a homegrown business that supports hundreds of jobs in our local economy is just shameful and ought to be an outrage to all Oregonians. Some fellow named McDermott. And then a lady named Ellen Carmichael, who I believe works for you, said, we are saddened to have our Congressman Earl Blumenauer call for a boycott that would put the livelihoods of thousands of his constituents in peril. The attack on our employees is unwarranted. And I couldn't agree more, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Blumenauer should not be using the vast influences that we as members of Congress have to bully you and your businesses and to harm the hundreds or thousands of employees that operate in your business by trying to take business away from you, to force you into doing something that they wanted you to do, which is actually testify, and you've actually done that. But that's a shame for that. And I'm hopeful that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join me in saying, Mr. Blumenauer, you really shouldn't be using your congressional influence to try to bully and threaten a witness before these proceedings. That is just wrong. And I'm going to look forward to my colleague's response, and I yield back.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and can you elaborate on what that change was?
Well, President Zelensky was elected to government.
Yeah, you got a brand new guy coming in. In fact, he had just been, I believe, sworn in the day you approved the dollars. Was it May 23rd? I think he was sworn in on, I guess it was a couple days before. But there's sort of a change in circumstances that it seemed to me would warrant at least maybe a second look. And that's exactly what played out for a short time. Less than 2 months, 55 days, our government evaluated the new situation. Pretty radical change. You got a new government. In fact, the previous one, we've heard all kinds of things from the Democrats about the prosecutor general and the Poroshenko regime, Mr. Lutsenko, and how bad he was. So it took a while for that all to happen. New president's sworn in. 2 months later, the new Congress comes in. Takes them a while to September 5th that they get rid of this prosecutor. And just a few days later, the aid actually gets released. But the Democrats got all kinds of other things they want to talk about. But the way this played out seems to me as logical as you can do it. And particularly when you put it in the broader framework of where this president is on concern about foreign aid, his deep-rooted concern in the corruption issue in Ukraine, the experience he had with high-ranking Ukrainian officials criticizing him and supporting Secretary Clinton in the 2016 election. Put all that together, sort of, I think, shows why it played out the way it did.
The impeachment version of three-card Monte. notorious short con card trick where the mark, in this case President Trump and the American public, stands no chance of winning. Democrats promised the whistleblower's testimony. In fact, they told us that we need to speak with the whistleblower. And then we learned that the whistleblower coordinated with the Democratic staff before alerting the intelligence community's inspector general. To hide their con, the Democrats pound the table and gaslight the country, telling us that the whistleblower is entitled to an imaginary statutory right of anonymity. They accuse us of trying to out the whistleblower, knowing that they're the only ones who know who he is. They say that if the facts are against you, argue the law. If the law is against you, argue the facts. And if both are against you, pound the table and yell like hell. It seems at law school these days, it's teaching their students a fourth tactic. If the facts and the law are against you, simply rig the game and hope your audience is too stupid to catch your duplicity. This is not an impeachment inquiry, it's an impeachment inquisition. In the Middle Ages, the inquisitor was free to act on his own and bring suit against any person who was even vaguely the subject of the lowest rumor. And the accused was denied any right to confront their accusers. Incredibly, or maybe not so much, given the Democrats' track record, an Inquisition victim had more rights than the Democrats are giving the president. After all, Inquisition victims had the right to know their accuser's name. For those of you at home, it's time to change the channel, turn down the volume, or hide the kids, put them to bed.
Ranking Member Nunes referenced President Trump's general skepticism of providing aid and the amount of foreign aid being provided to foreign countries. Would you agree with that characterization, Ambassador Hale?
We've often heard at the State Department that the President of the United States wants to make sure that foreign assistance is reviewed scrupulously to make sure that it's truly in U.S. national interests and that we evaluate it continuously so that it meets certain criteria that the President's established.
And since his election, is it fair to say that President Trump has looked to overhaul how foreign aid is distributed?
Yes, the NSC launched a foreign assistance review process sometime, I think it was late August or early September 2018.
All right. And throughout both his campaign and his administration, President Trump has repeatedly sought to reframe American foreign policy in economic terms, and as he described, America First policy. And consistent with that, well before there was a whistleblower talking about a pause on aid to the Ukraine, the president had expressed genuine concern about providing U.S. foreign assistance. To that point, is it fair to say that the president has wanted to ensure that American taxpayer money was being effectively and efficiently spent outside of the United States?
Yes, that is the broad intent of the foreign assistance review, among other goals.
And has the president expressed that he expects our allies to give their fair share of foreign aid, as evidenced by a point that he raised during the July 25th phone call with President Zelensky to that effect?
The principle of greater burden sharing by allies and other like-minded states is an important element of the foreign assistance review.
Is it fair to say that in the Trump administration, U.S. aid is withheld from foreign countries for a number of factors?
Correct.
And you've testified in your prior testimony that it is normal to have delays on aid.
I may have said it that way, but it is certainly an occurrence. It does occur.
In the past year, Ukraine was not the only country to have aid withheld from it. Is that correct?
Correct.
In the past year, was aid withheld from Pakistan?
Yes, sir.
Why was aid withheld from Pakistan?
Because of unhappiness over the policies and behavior of the Pakistani government toward certain proxy groups that were involved in conflicts with the United States.
And in the past year, was aid also withheld from Honduras?
Aid was withheld from the three states in northern Central America, yes.
In the past year, was aid withheld from Lebanon?
Yes, sir.
And when aid was first withheld from Lebanon, were you given a reason why it was withheld?
No.
So having no explanation for why aid is being withheld is not uncommon?
I would say it is not the normal way that we function.
But does happen?
It does happen.
And is it true that when aid was being withheld from Lebanon, that was at the same time aid was being withheld from Ukraine?
Correct, sir.
You've testified that the aid to Lebanon still hasn't been released. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. But the aid to Ukraine was released on September 11th, correct?
I read that, yes.
All right. So it's fair to say that aid has been withheld from several countries across the globe for various reasons, and in some cases for reasons that are still unknown just in the past year.
Correct, sir.
So the assertion's been made that President Trump's Ukraine policy changed when there was a pause in the aid, or the aid was withheld. Is that an accurate statement?
That was not the way I understood things to be happening at the time. We were not given an explanation.
And in terms of our policy, in terms of aid to Ukraine, you've described it as very robust.
Our aid to Ukraine?
Yes.
Yes.
As evidenced by President Trump's policy decision to provide lethal defensive weapons, Javelin missiles.
It was very robust, yes, sir.
And that was a decision that President Trump made that the prior administration, President Obama, had not done. Lethal weapons had not been provided to Ukraine in the Obama administration, correct?
I was not involved in Ukrainian affairs during the Obama administration, so I don't feel competent to address that.
And when aid to Ukraine was put on pause, I believe you've testified that there may have been concern by Secretary Kent and by Ambassador Taylor that it was contributing to a potentially negative effect on U.S.-Ukraine relations. Do you agree with that?
Well, the State Department position was to advocate for the continuation of that assistance as an important element, in fact, a key element of our strategy to support the Ukraine against Russia.
I don't mean to repeat the same questions ad nauseum, but I think we reached a point of nauseum, I don't know, sometime yesterday or some time ago. It's some repetitive here, and you'll forgive me for doing that. Although, Mr. Cooper, I do have some questions based on some things you've said previously. And I would just want to add, for clarification, there's a question about these emails that I think they claimed described withholding the aid, and they had come from Capitol Hill or from someone on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Is that true?
Sir, are you referring to my statement today or something previous?
I believe this was previous, a question we had previous. Are you aware of such an email?
I'm sorry, I don't think I have enough information to make an assessment. Is it from a particular page in my deposition?
No, it's just reporting that we've heard that there may have been communications with you with someone on the Foreign Affairs Committee on the Hill. Is that not true?
That there may have been communications with me?
Yes, email with you.
Sir, I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you. For clarification as well, someone may have asked you or queried you from the Ukrainian embassy about the withholding of aid. Is that true? Did you hear from them?
Sir, I testified earlier that the communication from the Ukrainian embassy was to my staff, and my staff mentioned this to me after my deposition. The only specific communication that I recollect with the Ukrainians about this specific issue was on, I believe it was September 5th, at a reception at the Ukrainian embassy.
And just to bore down on that just a little bit, was that just a query generally about the forthcoming aid, or was it specific regarding them being aware that the aid was being withheld?
Sir, just to be clear, the September 5th conversation that I had was specific to the hold. There was an awareness of that, and there was a question of concern.
Okay, thank you. You know, Ms. Cooper, well, to both of you, Under Secretary Hale as well, at the end of the day, it really does, and I've done this before, it really does come down to this. The transcript I'm holding up is a transcript of the phone call between President Zelensky and President Trump that I would hope every American would take the opportunity to read. It's only a few pages long. And much more information beyond that is maybe helpful to inform, but it really comes down to those conversations, those few sentences. But Mr. Hale, going quickly through a series of questions, and I have your answers here, so this won't take long, and you've answered them generally anyway. You agree the United States should evaluate whether a country is worthy of our aid. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
And you understand as well that President Trump has been skeptical generally of foreign aid and some of the money that we've given. Is that fair as well?
I think so.
And I think that's been fairly consistent. He's done that since before he was elected, I think. Others in the process have testified that Ukraine has a long history of corruption. That's not going to surprise any one of us. We've talked about that about 1,000 times. Do you think it was right that President Trump would test, is a word I think used previously, that he would test President Zelensky prior to providing some of the security assistance?
President Zelensky was new. I had met him in February. I was impressed by him, but I think it was understandable for the administration, as a new president in Ukraine was coming to office, to understand better what that president's policies would be and attitude toward the United States.
And see, Undersecretary, I think that's key because we've had it referred to while the DOD had completed their review about the same time. But this was a person who was elected and we knew nothing about him. He didn't have a history of governance in Ukraine. He came really a little bit like President Trump himself. He did not come from a public background that we would have much information on him. And it seems prudent, as you said, to kind of test him and to see if he was serious about Ukraine. And at some point, I'm going to conclude, I believe it was about Labor Day, the Secretary was able to engage the President on the security assistance. About the same time, by the way, that you had some others, Secretary, Vice President Pence and Bolton as well as a burden sharing review was completed, and shortly thereafter the aid was released. Is that your understanding?
I was never informed as to why the assistance was released. I did read about it.
Okay, well, those events did happen, and it seemed like they were the reason the aid was released, but thank you both.
We know that the most important support for Ukraine in terms of lethal defensive aid is in the forms of javelins. Would you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
And which administration were those javelins made available to Ukraine?
This administration, the Trump administration.
And not the Obama administration?
That is correct.
Both of you, have you ever spoken with the President about Ukraine aid?
No, I have not.
No, ma'am.
Undersecretary Hale, you testified that you had no direct knowledge of any nefarious motivations to withhold aid to Ukraine, correct?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, you testified that there were no strings attached to the aid, correct? That's page 184 of your deposition.
Yeah, no such knowledge.
And more specifically, you testified that you had no knowledge of Ukraine aid being held up for investigations. Is that correct?
Correct.
During the temporary hold of security assistance, this was until Ambassador Taylor sent you the cable, you had never even heard the words Burisma or Biden, correct?
Well, in the context of what we're discussing, correct.
Great, you testified that on page 96. And ultimately, as we know, the aid was released to Ukraine, correct?
Yes, I read that.
Now let's talk about the context broadly of this hold. You testified that it's not just Ukraine, that there were in fact other countries whose security assistance was on hold. Quote, the aid package to Lebanon was also being held in the same fashion, correct?
Correct.
And foreign aid was held from northern triangle countries of South America, correct?
Of Central America, correct.
Central America. And you also testified that when you served as ambassador to Pakistan, security assistance was also held for their failure to conform to our concerns regarding terrorists and other issues on the Afghan-Pakistan border.
Correct.
You know, basically, let's broadly talk about the context of all of these holds on aid. When we talk about aid, I always think about these are hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And isn't it correct that this administration, the Trump administration, has been conducting a foreign assistance review to reestablish norms that guide the assistance as we provide aid overseas?
That's correct.
You testified that this review had been going on for quite a while, and the administration did not want to take a business-as-usual approach to foreign assistance, a feeling that once a country has received a certain assistance package, it's something that continues forever. And you continued, the program had to be evaluated that they were actually worthy beneficiaries of our assistance, that our program made sense, that we avoid nation-building strategies, and that we provide assistance to countries that are lost in terms of our policy to our adversaries. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you testified that you warmly welcomed this assistance review.
Correct.
And again, just to get this on record and for the millions of Americans viewing, security assistance was in fact released to Ukraine. I know I've already asked this, but this is a really important point.
Correct. Ms. Cooper, based on the new emails that you mentioned in your opening and then subsequent declarations by some of my Democratic colleagues that those emails were evidence that the Ukrainians were aware of a military hold on July 25th, there's now reporting out there saying that Pentagon official reveals Ukrainians asked about stalled security aid. It's being widely reported that Ukraine asked about the hold on military aid on July 25th. That's not what I heard from you. Is that correct?
Sir, my exact words were that one email said that the Ukrainian embassy and the House Foreign Affairs Committee are asking about security assistance.
Assistance, not hold.
And then the second email was the Hill knows about the FMF situation to an extent, and so does the Ukrainian embassy. Those are the exact words.
And what do security assistance and FMF situation in these emails mean?
I don't want to speculate on what it means.
Right. They don't necessarily mean hold, correct?
Not necessarily.
And isn't it true that around the same time, OMB put a hold on 15 State Department and USAID accounts, including FMF?
I don't know that specific detail.
But you can't say one way or another whether the inquiries in these emails were about the hold. Is that fair?
I cannot say for certain.
All right. And you can't say one way or another whether the Ukrainians knew about the hold before August 28, 2019, when it was reported in Politico, correct?
Sir, I can just tell you that it's the recollection of my staff that they likely knew, but no, I do not have a certain data point to offer you.
Well, it's not unusual, is it, Ms. Cooper, for foreign countries to inquire about foreign aid that they're expecting from the United States, is it?
Sir, in my experience with the Ukrainians, they typically would call about specific things, not just generally checking in on their assistance package.
Are you aware that President Zelensky on October 10th, in response to questions from more than 300 reporters over the course of the afternoon, stated that he was not aware and had no knowledge of a hold on security assistance during the time of his July 25th phone call with President Trump?
I believe I saw that media reporting, yes.